My God, Mum, you ruined everything. That's what she said to me. That's how my daughter Emma greeted me at the entrance of her wedding. I hadn't planned to surprise anyone. I wasn't there to be seen. I came because I'd paid for half of it and wanted to see where my money went. Simple as that. The navy blue dress I wore was the most expensive I'd ever bought. My neighbor Ruth said it made me look like the woman who writes the checks, not the one who gets forgotten. That was the idea. I'd paid for the venue deposit, the flowers, even the custom napkins with Emma and Jonathan's initials. No one ever thanked me. They just forwarded invoices. They said it was easier this way, wire transfers, no drama. You'll be there in spirit, Mom? Spirit. The wedding was in a resort 2 hours from my town, up in the hills by the lake, where the parking lot was full of Teslas, and my little 2007 Corolla looked like a relic. But I'd made the drive myself. I hadn't told Emma. Part of me feared she'd say no. A bigger part knew she might not even respond. But the moment I stepped into the lobby and asked the clerk where the event was being held, I felt it. The strange looks, the polite distance, like I didn't belong. And still I smiled. I was determined to stay quiet, take a seat at the back, maybe catch Emma's eye during the vows. The receptionist hesitated. Are you with the Simmons-Whittaker party? I nodded. She double-checked the list. I don't see your name. It's all right, I said gently, already used to being unseen. I'm just a guest. I walked down the hallway lined with candles and rose petals, the kind of extravagance Emma used to mock when she was in college. People waste so much money on one day, she said once when I showed her my own wedding photo. But now she had a vision, and I, apparently, had the money to fund it. I paused at the edge of the ballroom, just enough to see the crowd. Emma stood under an arch of white orchids. She looked beautiful. Cold, too, like porcelain. Jonathan held her hand. The guests were smiling. No one noticed me, and then she did. Her face shifted so quickly I almost didn't catch it, from poised bride to alarmed daughter. She whispered something to a bridesmaid, who moved toward me in that swift, purposeful way young women do when they're asked to handle something awkward. Can I help you? The girl asked with a smile too tight to be real. I said my name. She faltered. Then Emma came over herself. Mum, she said through her teeth, what are you doing here? I blinked. Your wedding? You weren't invited. You thought wrong. She cut me off. This day is very curated. I told you we wanted to keep it intimate. You sent me invoices. I sent you money. I didn't think you'd actually come. She looked around, as if the presence of her mother would stain the pictures. There were no hugs, no warmth, no, I'm glad you're here anyway. Only a carefully placed arm on my shoulder, moving me toward the hallway. You should go, please, before people notice. I stepped back. I noticed, I said quietly. I noticed that I wasn't wanted. She didn't argue, just stood there, straight-backed, flawless, like the past 29 years of being her mother hadn't happened. I turned around and walked out. The only sound behind me was the soft click of the ballroom doors closing. Back in the car, I sat for a while, hands still on the steering wheel. My purse lay open beside me, and inside it, the envelope with the check I'd written that morning, a gift for their honeymoon. $10,000. I didn't cry. I just put the car in reverse and pulled out of the parking lot, past the valets and their earpieces, past the floral signs and curated smiles. I'd never felt so erased in my life. But the thing about being erased is, it gives you room to start writing again. From scratch. On your own terms. I didn't go straight home. I drove until the sun went down. until the road narrowed and the lake disappeared behind trees. I stopped at a gas station with flickering lights and bought myself a bottle of ginger ale. I hadn't eaten all day, but I wasn't hungry. Just hollow, like someone had scooped the insides out of me with a polite silver spoon. I parked behind the building, away from the pumps, and just sat. The dress itched at the waist, my shoes pinched. I kept seeing Emma's face, tight with embarrassment, not sorrow, like she was managing a crisis, not speaking to her mother. She used to run to me when she scraped her knees, when a boy didn't call, when she couldn't make rent during grad school. She used to call me Mama in a tone that carried the whole weight of need and love. Now she said Mom, like a warning label. I reached for my phone. No missed calls, no messages, just silence. And the envelope was still there, with the check neatly folded. I took it out, smoothed it on my lap, then tore it in half, then into quarters, then into shreds so fine they scattered when the window cracked open. I watched them float into the night. Then I drove home. It was past midnight when I pulled into my driveway, porch light still on, my neighbour's curtains drawn. I unlocked the door, kicked off the heels I'd bought just for today, and stood in my little hallway, staring at the mirror. The woman staring back at me didn't look humiliated. She looked tired, and older than she'd felt just this morning. I poured myself a glass of water, sat in the kitchen, and stared at the bills clipped neatly on the corkboard. The last wedding invoice was still up there. Final floral installment, $6,200. I'd paid it without question, just like I'd paid for the tasting dinner, the venue deposit, the hairstylist Emma insisted on flying in from Chicago. They didn't send invitations to Mom. They sent statements. I pulled out the folder I keep for Emma's things, labeled in faded pen. Inside were receipts going back a decade, tuition payments, medical bills from when she broke her ankle in Oregon, the down payment on her first condo. I'd never kept them for any reason other than bookkeeping, but tonight they looked like evidence. I looked at the phone again. Still no message. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my laptop and signed into my bank, pulled up my scheduled payments, the recurring transfer to Emma's account. Automatic monthly support. Her phrase, not mine. It had been running since she finished grad school, sometimes $500, sometimes more. I hovered over the cancel button, did it in one click, then another, for the credit card I'd co-signed for her when she and Jonathan were planning the wedding. She said it was just for emergencies. Apparently my presence was the emergency. Next was the name of the wedding planner. I still had her number. She'd only ever texted me updates, never called. I typed a message. Hi, this is Marion Lowry. Please send me a final list of outstanding wedding expenses. I'd like to review all charges before authorizing any further payments. Then I sat back. That old feeling started to rise, the one I used to get when I balanced the shop's books late at night, back when my husband was alive and we had to make every cent stretch. It wasn't bitterness. It was clarity, a cold, calm knowing. I'd bought my daughter a wedding. She didn't buy me a seat at the table. The next morning, I woke with my feet still swollen and my back aching from the long drive. But something in me had changed. I didn't feel like someone who'd been cast out. I felt like someone who had just stepped back into her own house, mentally, emotionally, financially. I made coffee, strong and bitter the way I like it, and sat at the table without turning on the news. I just sat there, holding the cup, listening to the refrigerator hum, the tick of the wall clock, the creak of old wood settling in. My house, my space, mine. At 9:12 a.m., the wedding planner replied to my message. Hi, Mrs. Lowry. I'm so sorry about any confusion. We still have 3 pending payments, Venue balance, $12,800, catering gratuity, $3,000, and honeymoon suite upgrade, $12,250. Please let us know how you'd like to proceed. I stared at the total. $18,050. I replied, please cancel all pending payments immediately. No further charges are authorized. 3 dots blinked. Then, understood. Please note that this may affect arrangements already in progress. So be it. By 10:00, I was on the phone with my bank's customer service. I asked to speak with someone in charge of business accounts. A man named Daniel came on the line, polite, too young, a little too eager. How can I help you today, Mrs. Lowry? I want to cancel all automatic transfers to my daughter, Emma Whitaker. I also want to revoke her access to my secondary credit card. I can assist with that, he said, after a pause. May I ask the reason? You may. She told me I ruined her wedding by showing up, one I paid for. There was a silence, broken only by the sound of him typing. I'm very sorry to hear that, Ma'am. I'm not. I adjusted the volume on the receiver. I'm just done paying for people who'd rather I not exist. We went through the steps, passwords, verifications, the usual. Then Daniel asked if I needed anything else. Yes, I said. I'd like to set up a trust account for my granddaughter. Emma's daughter. 14 years old, braces, bookish, kind. She once mailed me a hand-drawn birthday card with a pressed leaf inside. Her name is Charlotte Whitaker, I said. I want her to have something someday that's really hers. Daniel said he'd prepare the paperwork. When I hung up, the house felt lighter. By lunch, I had already received the cancellation receipts. It was done. The wedding, the money, the illusion. It was over. I had no messages from Emma, no calls. But around 2, I got a text from Charlotte. Grandma, were you at the wedding yesterday? I looked for you. I stared at the screen for a long time, then typed, I was there, sweetheart, briefly. I'll tell you all about it sometime. A minute later. I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on, but I wish I saw you. I miss you. I sat down on the couch and closed my eyes. I had not been seen. But I had not disappeared, and I was not finished. The first call came just after 5:30 that evening. Unknown number, but I knew it before I picked up. I waited through 3 rings before answering. Mum? Emma's voice was clipped, already tight with control. Why are there issues with the payments? No hello. No checking if I made it home safe. Because I cancelled them, I said evenly. There was silence. Then, what do you mean, cancelled them? I mean, I contacted the bank, told them not to release another cent for a wedding I wasn't allowed to attend. That's not fair, she snapped. You knew this was about optics, about image. We had a plan. I didn't get that memo, I said, rising from the couch. I was too busy writing checks. You said you didn't care about the attention. I didn't care about credit. But I did expect a chair. She went quiet again. You weren't on the guest list because we thought it would be difficult, she said eventually. You have opinions. Sometimes you say things. I have a face, I said. That was the problem. You didn't want it in the photos. That's not true, she whispered. But it was. And we both knew it. I thought of the times she flinched when I asked questions around her friends, corrected her grammar without meaning to, called out nonsense when I heard it. I wasn't polite enough. I wasn't polished. I was a woman who worked 60 hours a week in a family-owned grocery store and still clipped coupons for fun. You're right about one thing, though, I said. I do have opinions. And here's one. You'll pay your own way from now on. Mom, come on. This isn't about the money. It never is, I said, until the invoice arrives. She tried to pivot then, went soft. Look, I didn't mean to hurt you. The day was stressful. I panicked. You were embarrassed, I corrected her. You didn't want people asking who I was. You didn't want me to open my mouth and ruin your curated guest experience. That's not true, she repeated. And then, finally, the crack. But if you loved me, you would have understood what I was trying to protect. I stood completely still in my kitchen, staring at the refrigerator where her fifth-grade photo still hung, gap-toothed, grinning, covered in glue and glitter from a school project. You don't protect someone by pretending they don't exist, I said. She didn't reply. I ended the call. An hour later, the wedding planner emailed again. The hotel has received notification of funding withdrawal. We are unable to proceed with final preparations for post-wedding brunch unless an alternative payment method is provided. I didn't answer. That wasn't my brunch. Instead, I opened a new document on my computer. I typed the first line of my will, full legal name, the date, then stopped. Not out of hesitation, but precision. I'd schedule a real appointment with the estate attorney in the morning. This time, no one else would be writing their name beside mine. This time, I'd be seen. The next morning, I woke up to a voicemail from Jonathan, Emma's husband. Hi, Marion. I hope you're okay. Emma's very upset. There seems to be a misunderstanding with the bank or something. We'd really appreciate it if you could give us a call back. Thanks. I didn't return the call. I made toast, fed the neighbor's cat, who always sneaks through the fence, and booked a meeting with a lawyer I'd used years ago when I redid the house deed. At 11 o'clock sharp, I drove to his office, a little place tucked behind a coffee shop and a thrift store, with sun-faded chairs in the waiting room and the same receptionist who still remembered my name. Mrs. Lowry, she said, smiling like I was someone worth remembering. Mr. Winslow will see you now. Martin Winslow was older than I remembered, but his handshake was still strong. He wore the same brown corduroy jacket he always had, patched now at the elbow. He gestured for me to sit. What brings you in, Marion? He asked, already pulling out a legal pad. I need to update my will and set up a trust for Charlotte. He lifted his eyebrows slightly but didn't comment. That's what I liked about him. No small talk unless I invited it. I laid out everything clearly. No money to go to Emma, no power of attorney, no shared accounts. Charlotte would receive the bulk of my estate through a protected trust. She wouldn't even know it until she turned 25. Until then, funds would be allocated for her education and personal needs, managed by a third party. He nodded slowly as I spoke, then said, That's fair. You've thought this through. I've spent my whole life thinking about them. I think it's time I thought about me. We discussed terms, contingencies, the legal ins and outs. He told me it would take a few days to draft everything, but the first step was simple. Revoke Emma's access, remove her name from all old documents, that I could do immediately. By the time I walked out of that office, something in my chest had shifted. Not lighter, not happier, but aligned, like a picture finally straight on the wall. I went home and spent the afternoon cleaning out the second bedroom, Charlotte's room when she visited. I dusted the desk, fluffed the pillows, even opened the window to air it out. I didn't know when she'd come again, but I wanted her to know it was hers, not for sleepovers, not for pretend, but truly hers. Around 4:00 the phone rang again. Emma. I didn't answer. Then came the text. I heard you changed your accounts. Can we talk, please? And a second, 5 minutes later. You're being unfair. And a third, I didn't mean for you to feel excluded. I stared at the words. Not one mention of what she said to me at the wedding. Not one, "I'm sorry." Just positioning, spinning, damage control. I set the phone down and let it ring again later when Jonathan called. Then again, when Emma tried once more. I let every single call go unanswered. By dinner time, I was back at my table, eating soup I made for myself, with the overhead light dimmed and the world finally, quiet. At 8:37 p.m., Charlotte called. "Hi, Grandma," she said, her voice uncertain. "Can I ask you something? Did something happen between you and Mum? She won't really say, but she's been weird." I closed my eyes for a second. "Yes," I said. "Something happened, but not to worry. I'm all right." She was quiet for a moment. "I wish I'd seen you. I kept looking. I even saved you a seat." That almost broke me. "Thank you, sweetheart. That means more than you know." "You're not mad at me, are you?" she asked, and I heard the child in her again. "Never," I said softly. "You're the only one who made space for me." And I meant every word. The envelope with the shredded check was still in my purse. I hadn't emptied it since the wedding. That night, I finally sat down at the kitchen table and dumped everything out. Compact, tissue packet, breath mints, pen, spare house key, old grocery receipt, and the envelope, now limp and crumpled. I smoothed it out and placed it flat on the table. Inside had once been $10,000. $10,000 I'd intended to give them as a honeymoon gift, no strings attached. Because I thought that was what mothers did, especially ones who had money now after a lifetime of not having it, especially when they were trying to hold on to whatever scraps of closeness remained. I looked at the envelope for a long time. Then I lit a match and fed it to the sink. The edges curled quickly, folding inward as if trying to shield themselves from what was coming. I stood over it, watched it disappear into grey and ash. The check was long gone, the intention with it. I rinsed the sink and made tea. It was only then, sitting down, that I finally allowed myself to remember the words she had said. Not the tone, not the implication. The actual words. "You weren't invited." It played over and over again in my mind. "You weren't invited," not, "It must have gotten lost in the mail," not, "There was a mistake," not, "We meant to, but forgot." No, it was intentional, decided, arranged, planned. That's the part that burned. Because I wasn't just excluded, I was removed. And still, I had almost handed her $10,000 in congratulations. How many times had I done that? Handed her help wrapped in a ribbon of silence, paid off her emergencies, wired her joy, bought my way into the edge of her life. My late husband would have said, "You can't keep giving if no one's taking care of you." He died before Emma's 20s, before the long unraveling between us began. I used to wonder what he would have said if he'd seen the way she looked at me now. I don't wonder anymore. I know. He would have said, "Enough." I got up, walked into the living room, and opened the drawer beneath the old lamp. Inside were folders, some mine, some his. I pulled out one labelled Estate Preliminary Notes. A draft I'd started a year ago and never finished. The original version split everything down the middle. Emma and Charlotte, equal beneficiaries. That was before the wedding plans, before the last few months, when Emma stopped calling altogether, except to coordinate logistics. I crossed out Emma's name. Charlotte's would stay. The rest would go where it mattered. To things I believed in. The food bank, the local women's shelter, the after-school literacy program I used to donate to when I still ran the store. I would write it all properly tomorrow with the lawyer, but tonight I needed to take that first step. Claiming your life back is never loud. It's quiet, sharp, clean. By 10 hours, I had repacked the folders, wiped down the counters, and sat back down with my tea. The phone vibrated on the table again. Emma. Then again. Jonathan. I turned it face down and let it buzz into silence. Tomorrow they'd learn what happens when a woman you erased decides not to erase you back, but to simply walk away and close the door. The next morning, I heard from Charlotte again. A text first, just one line. "Can I come over today?" I didn't hesitate. "Of course, sweetheart. Any time." She showed up around noon, hair pulled into a messy bun, sneakers scuffed at the toes, her backpack slung over one shoulder like it was part of her spine. She looked older than 14 and younger than the weight she was carrying. She didn't speak right away, just walked into the kitchen like she used to, took her usual seat and folded her hands in front of her. "Mum's freaking out," she said finally. I poured her some lemonade. I imagined. "She's not saying much, but I heard them last night, her and Dad. He said something about the brunch being cancelled, and she was yelling about the bank and how it was supposed to be discreet." Charlotte looked up at me. "Did you really pay for the whole wedding?" I didn't blink. "Most of it." She chewed her lip. "And she didn't want you there?" I gave her the smallest of nods. "She told me you were tired, that you preferred to watch the live stream." "There was a live stream?" "I would have watched if I'd known," I said. We sat in silence for a moment, the lemonade sweating on the table between us. "I don't understand her sometimes," Charlotte said. "She says one thing, but then I see her face when your name comes up. It's like she's ashamed of something, or afraid." "She's afraid I'll remind her who she used to be," I said softly. "That once upon a time she didn't care about menus and monograms. She just cared about people." Charlotte didn't say anything. I got up and reached for a box in the hallway closet, an old shoebox I'd labelled Emma, Young Years. I brought it to the table and opened the lid. Inside were photographs, drawings, a few of her old birthday cards to me. One crayon-coloured masterpiece read, "Mommy, you're better than chocolate." Charlotte laughed quietly. "She made that when she was 6, I said. "Wouldn't eat vegetables, but made me breakfast in bed for Mother's Day." "She doesn't talk about any of that." "She packed those years away," I said. "Maybe because they came with struggle. We were poor, Charlotte, but we were close." "I don't care about any of that," she said. "I care that you're kind. You always see me." I felt something ache in my chest. She looked down. "And now Mum's saying you're punishing her, that this is revenge." I looked at her steadily. "Do I seem angry to you?" "No," she whispered. "You seem like someone who stopped waiting." I smiled. "That's exactly what I am." She stayed all afternoon. We made grilled cheese. She helped me bring down the fall decorations from the attic. We laughed about nothing. For the first time in weeks, the house felt lived in. Before she left, I gave her a key. "In case you ever want to come by when I'm not home," I said. She stared at it. "Mom's going to be furious." "I know." She slipped it into her backpack. "I don't care." She hugged me so hard my bones cracked. After she left, I stood by the door for a long time. Emma hadn't given me a seat, but Charlotte had given me a home again. The first official letter arrived 3 days later. A formal-looking envelope, cream-coloured, addressed in a tight, expensive hand. I recognized the return address immediately, Emma and Jonathan's. Inside was a printed letter. 3 paragraphs. "Dear Mum, we're deeply saddened by recent events. What was supposed to be the happiest week of our lives has been clouded by confusion and disappointment. While we appreciate your past support, we were hurt by your decisions and feel blindsided by the financial cancellations, which have created significant disruptions for us and our vendors. We hope in time we can rebuild our trust and return to more stable communication. For now, we are taking a step back to process and reflect. Best, Emma and Jonathan. No mention of the words spoken at the wedding, no apology, just polished detachment, like a press release. I folded the letter and placed it in the kitchen drawer. It didn't deserve the shredder. That evening, I called Mr. Winslow to finalize the documents. He'd prepared everything: the updated will, the trust for Charlotte, the revocation of financial powers previously granted to Emma. He read through it all with the same calm precision he always had. When he got to the trust language, I interrupted. "Can we add a clause?" I asked. "Of course. I want it to specify that if Charlotte's ever made to feel like I was excluded, silenced, ignored, she has full right to reallocate the trust funds, to donate them, to use them to start something of her own, something no one can take credit for but her." He looked at me over the rims of his glasses. "That's poetic," he said. "It's policy," I replied. We signed everything, sealed and notarized. Afterward, I stopped by the cafe down the street, ordered a slice of cherry pie and coffee, sat by the window and watched people pass. I couldn't remember the last time I'd done that. Gone out just for me. No errands, no checklists, no guilt. At the next table, two women in their 70s were talking about their grandkids. One was helping her granddaughter with college applications. The other said she hadn't heard from hers in months. "She only calls when she needs something," she said with a shrug. "That's life, I guess." I wanted to lean over and say, "No, that's not life. That's what we've accepted as life. There's a difference." But I didn't. I just ate my pie. When I got home, the message light on my landline was blinking again. I didn't check it. I already knew the voices I'd hear. Emma, maybe Jonathan, maybe someone pretending to mediate. It no longer mattered. Instead, I went into the spare room, Charlotte's room, and placed the signed trust documents into the drawer of her little desk, right next to the sketch pad she'd forgotten last time. One day, when she was old enough, I'd tell her it was there, that someone had thought ahead for her, quietly, without applause. At 9 that night, I received a message that surprised me. Not from Emma, from Jonathan. It read, "Marion, I understand you're upset. I just want you to know I had no part in the guest list decision. That was all, Emma. I'm sorry you were hurt." No follow-up. No demands. Just a single belated sentence of decency. I didn't reply. He'd had a chance to speak up 3 days ago when I stood outside the ballroom, and he hadn't. That night, I slept better than I had in months. No pills, no restless tossing. Just the steady rhythm of someone who had nothing left to explain and everything ahead of her to claim. Morning came slow and grey, the kind of sky that makes you want to stay in bed and pull the covers over your head. But I didn't. I had a list of things to do, appointments to keep. I'd spent too long being a ghost in my own life. Charlotte called around noon. "Grandma, I was thinking, maybe I could come stay with you for a weekend soon? Mum's been really tense, and I think she's mad at me because of you." I smiled at the phone. "Of course, sweetheart. You're always welcome." She hesitated. "You don't mind?" "Mind? No. I want you here." Her voice cracked a little. "Okay, I'll ask Mom tonight." I heard her breathe in, then out. "Thanks, Grandma." We ended the call. That afternoon, I went to the library. I sat with a book about women who rebuilt their lives after betrayal, after loss, after silence. I underlined a line. Your worth is not dictated by others' approval. I read it again and again. On the way home, I stopped by the women's shelter and left a check. Not from Emma's money, from mine. At 5 I got a message from a number I didn't recognize. It was a local reporter. Mrs. Lowry, I'm working on a story about family estrangement and financial control. Would you be willing to talk? Your story is compelling. I laughed quietly, then typed back, not today. But the phone rang again 2 minutes later. Please, he said. I think your story needs to be told. I didn't answer. Dinner was quiet. I cooked enough for one, ate with the lights low. I didn't cry. I didn't feel sorry. I felt steady. Later, the phone buzzed again. Emma. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I deleted the message without reading it. At 10 I looked out the window. The street was empty. The air smelled like rain. I whispered to myself, I'm still here, and I'm still me. Tomorrow, I'd call my lawyer to schedule a meeting about charitable giving and estate planning. I'd call Charlotte's school to volunteer for the reading program. I'd call Ruth to ask how she was doing, because for the first time in years, I was living for myself. And that was enough. The weeks that followed were a strange mixture of silence and small ripples of contact. Emma didn't call anymore. Jonathan sent a few terse messages asking about paperwork and payments. But it was Charlotte who reached out the most. One afternoon, she came over again, this time with a school project tucked under her arm, a scrapbook of family memories she'd been compiling. She opened it carefully, showing me pictures of my late husband and me, of Emma as a toddler, birthday parties, Christmas mornings. It's strange, she said quietly. I feel like I'm meeting you and Grandma for the first time. I smiled and took her hand. You are. In a way, you always knew me, but now you really see me. Charlotte's innocence was a balm to my bruised spirit. She was my hope, my connection to something unbroken, something pure. One evening, I received a phone call from a woman named Diane, the director of the women's shelter I supported. She invited me to speak at a fundraiser, to share my story. I hesitated at first, but the idea took root. Maybe this was part of my next chapter, giving voice to women who had been silenced, forgotten, or dismissed. The day of the event, I stood behind the podium, facing a room full of attentive faces. I spoke quietly but clearly, telling the story of love, betrayal, and reclaiming dignity. I didn't mention names or specifics. I spoke about the strength it takes to say no, to set boundaries, to honor yourself. Afterward, women came up to me, sharing their own stories, their own battles. I realized I was not alone, and neither were they. Back home, my phone buzzed. A text from Emma, short, unadorned. I'm sorry. I stared at the words, heart pounding. Then another message. I miss you. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my journal and wrote, I am more than their anger and their silence. I am more than the money I gave or the places I wasn't allowed to sit. I am the sum of my courage, my love, my resilience. And I will not be erased. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready. The morning after the fundraiser, I woke with a quiet sense of purpose. The speeches, the stories, the faces of the women who'd come to listen, they stayed with me. I felt less alone, less invisible. I called my lawyer, Martin Winslow, to schedule a meeting for the following week. I wanted to finalize everything: my will, the trust, the charitable donations. I wanted to ensure my wishes were clear, legally binding, and unassailable. That afternoon, I went to the bank to confirm the trust account for Charlotte was set up properly. I sat with a young banker named Elise, who showed genuine kindness. I told her, "This isn't just money. It's a promise. To her and to myself." She smiled and said, "That's beautiful." Back home, I sorted through old boxes in the attic, things that once belonged to my husband and me. Wedding albums, letters, keepsakes. Each item was a piece of my story, a reminder of where I came from. I found a letter George had written me years ago, tucked inside a book of poetry. "Marian, you are stronger than you know. When life tries to break you, stand tall. You deserve to be seen, loved, and heard." I held the letter to my chest, tears slipping quietly down my cheeks. For years, I'd carried the weight of others' expectations, sacrificing my own needs and dignity. No more. The next few days were peaceful. Charlotte visited often, her laughter filling the rooms that had felt so empty. She helped me plant tulips in the garden, brought homemade cookies, and shared stories of school. Emma remained distant, her messages fewer and more tentative. I didn't respond, letting space do its work. One evening, a neighbour named Alice stopped by with a basket of fresh apples and a warm smile. "I heard about the fundraiser," she said. "I'm proud of you." Her words, simple and sincere, meant more than she knew. As summer waned, I began volunteering regularly at the women's shelter, organising book drives and leading cooking classes. The work gave me joy and connection. I was no longer just a mother or a grandmother. I was Marian Lowry, woman, survivor, storyteller, and I was finally free. Autumn arrived quietly, painting the trees in shades of amber and gold. The days grew shorter, but inside me, a fire burned steadily. I was learning to live again, on my own terms, in my own time. Charlotte's visits became the highlight of my weeks. We baked pies, read books, and planned her future. She talked about college, her dreams, and her worries. She trusted me, and that trust was a balm I never knew I needed. One afternoon, while we were organising the pantry, the phone rang. It was Emma. For a moment, my heart fluttered. A dangerous thing for someone who had spent so long guarding it. "Hello, Emma," I said calmly. There was a pause. Then, "Hi, Mum. I wanted to talk." I listened as she stumbled through apologies, explanations, and excuses. She talked about fear, fear of judgment, fear of losing control, fear of not being perfect. I didn't interrupt. I let her speak. When she finished, I said, "Thank you for telling me. I've waited a long time to hear that." She hesitated. "Can we try again? Maybe start over?" "I think we can," I said softly. "But things need to change. For both of us." She agreed. We planned to meet for coffee the next week. After the call, I felt a strange mix of hope and caution. Healing is a slow river, not a sudden flood. That evening, I wrote in my journal, "I am opening a door, not just for her, but for me, to forgiveness, to understanding, to a new kind of love, one that doesn't demand silence or sacrifice." As I closed the journal, Charlotte came into the room, holding a vase of wildflowers she'd picked. "For you," she said. I smiled and hugged her. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the promise of new beginnings. The coffee shop where Emma and I agreed to meet was a small, cozy place with worn wooden tables and the smell of fresh cinnamon rolls in the air. I arrived early, sat by the window, and watched the world go by. People hurrying with umbrellas, children chasing after dogs, the autumn leaves swirling like they had their own stories to tell. Emma walked in right on time, her face a mix of nervousness and relief. She looked different, softer, more human somehow. The years of distance and silence seemed to hang in her shoulders, But there was also a glimmer of hope. We talked for hours, not just about the wedding, or the money, or the misunderstandings. We talked about everything that had built the walls between us, the fears, the resentments, the unspoken hurts. She admitted to feeling overwhelmed by the expectations of her social circle, the pressure to present a perfect life. She confessed that cutting me out of the wedding was her misguided attempt to protect that illusion. I told her about the loneliness I'd felt, the ache of invisibility, and the relief I'd found in reclaiming my dignity. There were tears, there were laughs, there was silence filled with understanding. At one point, Charlotte appeared, shy but radiant, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers. She slipped into the conversation effortlessly, bridging the gap between mother and grandmother. By the time we left, the sky was painted with the pinks and purples of dusk. I felt lighter, as if years of tension had dissolved into the cool evening air. Walking home, I realized that healing wasn't about forgetting or forgiving overnight. It was about showing up, again and again, with open hands and a willing heart. I wasn't just Emma's mother anymore. I was a woman who had learned to say no, to set boundaries, and to love fiercely, without losing herself. At home, I placed the wildflowers in a vase by the window, watching as the last light faded behind them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time in a long time, I was ready. The days grew colder, and the house filled with the scent of burning wood and cinnamon. I found myself enjoying the quiet moments more than I expected, the way the light played across the old furniture, the gentle creak of the floorboards, the steady rhythm of my own breath. Charlotte was back for a weekend visit. We made hot chocolate and watched old movies, laughing at scenes I hadn't seen in years. She asked about my life before Emma, about my wedding to George, about the shop we ran together. I told her stories I hadn't shared with anyone else, about hope, hard work, and love that endured even when everything else crumbled. One evening, as we sat by the fire, the phone rang. It was Emma. I hesitated before answering. "Hi, Mom," she said softly. "I wanted to thank you for yesterday, for coming to talk. It meant more than I can say." "I'm glad," I replied. There was a pause, then she said, "I've been thinking a lot about us, about my own fears and mistakes. I want to be better. For you, for Charlotte, for myself." "I believe you," I said. We made plans to spend more time together, to rebuild what had been broken, but this time, carefully, with respect and honesty. Later that week, I visited the local community centre and signed up to lead a support group for women dealing with family estrangement. The work was challenging but fulfilling. Sharing stories, listening to others, and knowing that none of us were truly alone, it gave me strength. At home, I found myself writing letters, not emails or texts, but real letters, on paper, with ink and stamps, to friends, to family, to myself. One letter was addressed to Emma. In it, I wrote about forgiveness, not as forgetting or excusing, but as freeing myself from bitterness. About love, not as obligation, but as choice. About hope, not as naive optimism, but as quiet determination. I didn't send it right away. I wasn't sure if I ever would. But writing it was a step. And sometimes, that's enough. The quiet strength I'd been cultivating found its fullest expression one crisp morning as I stood in the garden, watching the first frost settle on the tulips Charlotte and I had planted. The flowers looked fragile, yet somehow unyielding, just like me. I thought about the years spent bending, giving, hoping to be seen, loved, and accepted. About the times I was ignored, excluded, and diminished. About the wedding I'd paid for, but wasn't allowed to attend. about the daughter who told me I'd ruined her day by simply showing up. And yet, here I was, still standing, not because they needed me, but because I finally needed myself. I had learned that dignity isn't given, it's taken, that respect isn't demanded, it's earned, often from ourselves first, that love, real love, isn't about possession or control, but about freedom. Freedom to choose who stays in your life and who doesn't. Freedom to say no without guilt. Freedom to rebuild, redefine, and reclaim. That day, I called Charlotte and told her about the garden, about the frost, about resilience. She laughed and promised to come over soon, to see for herself. I sat down later, opened my journal, and wrote a letter to you, the woman reading these words. You who knows pain, who understands silence, who has been forgotten or dismissed. You who has loved without receiving, given without thanks, waited without answers. Listen to me. You are not alone. You are not invisible. Your story matters, and your voice deserves to be heard. Do not let anyone make you feel less than you are. Stand tall. Speak clearly. Love fiercely. And above all, never stop believing in yourself, because no one else will do it for you.